You price the locals out of the market, so there are no longer service employees. What do you wish tourists would stop doing when visiting tourist destinations? Clean up your trash. I used to live in a spring break destination which was a small surf town. After spring break, people would be cleaning up pounds upon pounds of beer cans, broken bottles and needles. It's revolting. Somebody replied, this happened 100 times. A bunch of tourists from the city threw a Domino's pizza box and empty packets of seasoning on the side of the road and went. This said place is actually a fragile ecosystem. These tourists forgot that in India when you order from Domino's, your phone number is attached to the bill that is taped to your box. So a local who happened to pass by and see the trash, inspected and found the phone number. He called up the number on it and asked them to drive back and take their trash with them. The group had already traveled more than 80 kilometers away at this point, so they refused to come. The dude promptly went to the police and threatened to file a case for littering. The tourists drove back and picked up their garbage. Stop walking out into the middle of an active downtown street to take group pictures of yourselves in cheerleading outfits on the spot where Kennedy was shot. Los Angeles has the young fashion students and influencers walking out into busy streets to take fashion photos. There's one particular palm tree-lined street in Beverly Hills that always has traffic backed up due to all the college-age people taking pictures in the middle of the street for Instagram. As someone who frequently has to commute through Abbey Road, it is always a pain to have to go down that street, unless it's raining. Due to all the people trying to recreate the album cover. This is so common that there's a live cam pointing at the crossing. Watch for a minute and see how many people pose. I will leave the link as a pinned comment. Stop acting like you're discovering something for the first time. It's literally a tourist destination. I overhear these so-called influencers talking to their phone or TikTok audience about finding a little obscure restaurant. Honey, it's literally owned by Thomas Keller? I'm from one of those super bougie, Michelin-star restaurant areas where resorts and celebrities like to visit. It's a popular wedding area, famed for the weather and scenery. Of all the tourists, the influencer tourist influx in my area is so annoying. They just stand in the sidewalks downtown and cause traffic. And it's a location where you can drink a lot of one specific thing, so they get day drunk and messy. Stopping their cars in the middle of the road to take in a view is ridiculous. They do this for wildlife where I live. I've seen idiots chasing bears with cubs into the forest to take pictures with their phones. A friend of mine lost a relative because a tourist in a bear jam didn't look before pulling back into traffic on the road because he was so focused on the bear and didn't see the cyclists. Hit one of them and broke the cyclist's neck. Somebody replied, sort of related, but we get a lot of folk moving here who are used to city living. They visit once, then buy $1 million home and decide they're nature people now. It's really been ratcheting up lately. The sheer number of complaints about wildlife are astounding. My favorite, and most emblematic example, was that someone wrote a next-door post about how the park rangers wouldn't come out when she called about a bear. A bear that was on the trail. In the woods. Of a national forest. She was indignant and asked if the sheriff department would do anything. Lady, that bear's family has been here many more generations than you or me. It's their trail. Stop feeding the seagulls. Flying rat butts have literally been trained to expect food if you're standing on anything dock or deck shaped. Some will even try to snatch it from your hands. Somebody replied, I worked at Disney World for a few years and the squirrels there are vicious. People think it's fun to feed them, so they are completely fearless. They'll hop right into a stroller and grab food from a child. Getting drunk or high and getting in people's business, or picking fights with the doorman or bar staff. Or talking about weed and getting stoned the entire time. Or asking me where the red light district is while standing in the red light district. Or renting a bike when the last time you rode one was in preschool. Somebody replied, I really feel you on this one. Amsterdam was naturally my first stop on a tour of the Netherlands, and I remember walking around thinking I could live there. And then night came and I quickly changed that mindset. It was only the tourists. The locals were amazing. I even had a friend who moved out of central Amsterdam because he was so sick of people vomiting in his flower pots. I used to live and work in one of the UK's university towns. Most of my research work was done in one of the college libraries, which was built in about 1580. In the summer especially, we would have endless streams of tourists trooping through, shouting at the top of their voices. The library was in a private, no access zone, and marked clearly with private, no admittance signs. The tourists could be quite abusive when asked to leave because they had paid for their tour, which meant they were entitled to go anywhere they wanted, take pictures of all the students and shout to each other about how old and cute everything looked. People live and work here, you morons. Can't you understand that? And the littering and smoking in a library full of rare books is sheer stupidity. Please visit local businesses. They were hard hit by COVID. I know they aren't as big and well known as Disney and Kennedy Space Center, but they have a lot of charm too. This is a huge thing that can help a lot. For the time you visit, try local restaurants and specialty shops even if it costs a bit more. A local surf or diving shop will be competitive and will usually have the right items for the location. I grew up in a beach town with some businesses only staying afloat from tourist money during times with good weather. Taking pictures of locals. Just don't take pictures or videos of people without their consent. This doesn't apply when you're just taking pictures of a plaza or street or something. There are going to be people in the photo, but there's a difference between being a minor detail in a landscape shot versus being the focus of the picture. But having some random person taking a photo or video focused on you feels particularly invasive. In New York, if you visit, please walk on the right side of the sidewalk, not the left. Also, if you need to stop and look at your phone or have a conversation with your fellow travelers, step aside. People are walking and if you abruptly stop, it usually results in someone bumping into you. Also, do not walk with 5 people side by side in a convoy. People can't get around you. It is infuriating. But, please keep visiting NYC. And if you get lost, don't hesitate to ask the locals. I'm from Philly, not NYC. But I've spent enough time there and around the general area to notice that New Yorkers are actually total kittens, and they love giving directions to lost tourists. They're just in a rush and trying to catch the train and get the hell home in a city of 8 million people. Get out of their way and you're good. Unless you need directions, then multiple people are probably going to stop and try to help you. Stop being a belligerent butthole just because you're in New Orleans. It's still not an excuse to get blackout drunk, litter, and make hell for food service workers. I visited there recently for the first time. I'm in my late 30s, and I figured I would see lots of drunk younger people. I was surprised by how many 40-plus-year-olds were smashed. A few people were passed out in corners while their friends tried to wake them up. It was really not what I expected. But the city itself is pretty cool. Leave the wildlife alone. This doesn't just extend to tourists, but to people who live here too. 45+ coyote attacks last year were in no small part because people were giving them food, leading to a cull. Bears are getting habituated to people because they're being given food, leading to them getting killed. Otters and sea lions are getting fed. They're not cute cuddly things. They're wild animals, and they will kill you. And then, because they're doing what they do, they'll get killed because they're dangerous to humans. When in reality they're only dangerous to ignorant rubes with no respect for nature. Somebody replied, I live in Florida. Alligators are not your friends. Snakes are not your friends. Leave the birds alone. And stop feeding them. As someone who lives in Arizona, it is surprising to me that I have to explain to other citizens of this state that if you hear rattling under the branch you're about to step over while hiking, walk away. Instead, they apparently hear pick it up or try to step over it and get a good, close look at the hospital visit you're about to have. Also, that coyote you see? He's likely not alone. Do not approach it. In Spain, we get a lot of tourists. Very well behaved for the most part where I am. So, thanks for doing it right, tourists. The worst is littering on the beach, which is thankfully pretty rare. I occasionally see someone put a cigarette butt in the sand. A lot are taken away when they leave, but the sand has a way of hiding stuff, so a lot remain. I'll give you tourists one tip. Night swimming. If you put your keys, glasses, etc. down in the sand, they're gone. Between the sand and the dark, you'll never see them again. Somebody replied, as a Spaniard as well, for me it's the music and noise. Especially on a hiking trail or in a beautiful secluded scenic area in the woods. I don't want to listen to private conversations on speakerphone or music from a loud boom box. For your sake, stop trying to pet the buffalo. Or don't, some of us are entertained by the videos of you flying through the air. Somebody replied, my mom used to work at Old Faithful in Yellowstone. Once, there was a buffalo standing outside the inn and a tourist asked my mom if they could pet it. Driving drunk is never a good idea. I live in Sonoma County, California, and the roads around here can be dangerous, especially on a sunny weekend when the winery tasting rooms are closing. Make sure you have a sober driver. The roads around here are never more dangerous than winery tasting room closing time on a sunny weekend. In my hometown, it somehow became a thing that tourists would rent mopeds. So when you are trying to get to work, you often get stuck behind a flock of tourists on mopeds, riding at 20 miles per hour in formation so you cannot pass them. We are infested with gawking tourists' moped gangs. If they want to rent mopeds, at least go the speed limit, and ride in a manner that allows others to pass you. Somebody replied, my town has this issue, except with golf carts. Dear tourists, if you want to go slow and see the sea with a family, get a quadricycle and enjoy the views from the huge, uninterrupted sidewalk. Stop blocking traffic for everyone else just because one of our major roads happens to run along the shore. Thank you. I live on a Caribbean island. People who complain that they can't get a Heineken or a Bud Light here. People who complain that they can't get fast food or chain food here. People who basically are angry that a tiny island in the Caribbean isn't just like the Houston suburbs. If you want everything you have in the US, stay in the US. Also infuriating during the pandemic, they said, your island requires masks and negative tests. Well, if you keep that up we will not be visiting and will take our money elsewhere. Fine. Go elsewhere. We don't want you on our island, where the entirety of our healthcare is a small clinic with 5 beds. Don't threaten people with money, absolute entitled buttholes. Somebody replied, my sister lives in the Virgin Islands and has a million stories about rich people acting all entitled and expecting things to be like the mainland. The locals exact revenge by blacklisting these people, and on a small island it doesn't take long until no one wants to work for you. Going on the Black Rocks and being swept out to the Atlantic Ocean risks the lives of first responders and locals, many of whom are already traumatized from Swiss Air. There are so many signs telling us to stay off the Black Rocks. I'm starting to think that the people who get rescued should have to pay for it. I know people are stupid as hell, but how difficult can it be to understand that the rocks are dark because they are wet? Wet rocks are slippery, smooth wet rocks doubly so. The rocks are smooth and wet because of the waves. How is it not clicking that it's not a great idea to stand where the waves have and will hit? We had to move out of a sort of touristy area because visitors were out of control. Endless partying at short-term rentals in the neighborhood made us feel unwelcome at our regular spots because we have very polite kids. The staff were always cool, but out-of-town people always acted like, how dare we bring a kid out for pancakes on a Saturday morning? If you get an Airbnb in a residential neighborhood because it's close to the beach, respect the neighborhood. Drinking outside with music playing and whooping it up at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday because you are on vacation doesn't mean the other people on the street are on vacation too. And definitely don't be a butthole when someone you've just woken up has to put on clothes and come outside to tell you that. We do call the police. If you wanted to party 24 hours a day non-stop, you should have gone someplace that caters to that. Somebody replied, I lived in a neighborhood that was mostly residential but had a couple blocks long commercial strip with some bars and music venues. It was a pretty quiet neighborhood overall. The businesses kept the noise mostly indoors and residents were fairly quiet when walking home drunk because they respected their neighbors. When Airbnb started up, the neighborhood got sort of known as a cool party destination, and we had loads of drunk people wandering through residential streets screaming and playing loud music at all hours. When taxi customers say I paid a lot to be here, change your driving or I'll leave a horrible review. driving like a dickhead, leaving garbage anywhere but a rubbish bin, stopping in the middle of the road to let out your family of 12 instead of pulling into the parking lot. I have a lot of stories. I live in Hawaii and work only with tourists. Best yet, my company was asked to contact the cruise ship company to have them move the ship because it disrupted the sunset. Deciding they like it so much here that they are going to purchase our homes for over market value so they can turn them into Airbnbs. And in turn, pricing the locals out of ever owning homes in their own town. Somebody replied, and then they complain that the service is terrible at the stores and restaurants. You price the locals out of the market, so there are no longer service employees. Defacing World Heritage sites for souvenirs or internet clout is unacceptable. For example, the Colosseum in Rome has graffiti carved into its walls by thoughtless tourists, and Stonehenge is closed off to the public because people were chipping pieces off for souvenirs. Somebody replied, just for context, both of these places have been subject to vandalism for more than a millennia. This isn't some new phenomenon created by Instagram. The concept of a World Heritage Site that ought to remain untouched for future generations is a relatively recent one. Of course, it's much easier these days to whip out a Sharpie than to whip out a chisel, but for centuries that was indeed common. Indeed, visitors to Stonehenge in the late 1800s were issued chisels upon arrival, so they could take a bit of Stonehenge with them. The practice wasn't banned until the early 1900s, and even then it continued ad hoc. Stonehenge was bought at auction 100 years ago, and was at the time one of the first places to even be a National or World Heritage Site. Even then people were permitted to climb on the stones. When they were eventually roped off, it was due to the general erosion and impact of allowing people to touch and climb and stand on the stones for years, not due to anyone coming at them with a hammer and chisel. The two instances of actual vandalism in the past 2 decades, a small part of an important stone chipped off and a smiley face in spray paint, were both national news. What did you think of these points? Do any sound familiar to you? Personally, I feel a lot better of a tourist after reading them. Do you have any experience with awful tourists? Let me know in the comments below.